Do you remember what your hands can do? Grab a needle and thread, and let's sew together. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to do a beautiful, tiny rolled hem. These rolled hems are used on a variety of items historically. For example, caps, cravats, head wraps, chemisettes, elbow ruffles, all going to have a rolled hem. They're also excellent for using on modern clothing such as silk scarves or pocket squares. Knowing how to roll a hem is also very helpful if you want to make whipped gathers like these, as these are rolled and then whipped over in order to make that ruffle. So before you can do a roll whipped gather, you have to know how to roll a hem like this. Grab your fabric, needle, threads, and hands, and let's get sewing. The first thing that we need to practice is rolling the fabric into place. Before we even pick up a needle, we want to make sure our hands know how to manipulate the fabric into a beautiful, tight roll. So if you are right-handed, you're going to start on the right-hand side of the fabric, and if you're left-handed, you're going to start on the left-hand side of the fabric. Especially for something like linen, I like to start maybe like a half an inch or like a centimeter or so away from the edge, and just start pinching the fabric and just rolling it. So you're kind of getting that fabric, kind of gently kind of pushing it in the direction that you want to go. And then once it starts to go in that direction, then push and roll it. Just get used to that idea. Sometimes I wet my fingers and that actually helps it. Make sure that you're pushing it in the direction of the grain line. You don't want it to go off course one direction or the other. The other thing to remember as you're rolling your hems is that you're going to actually be rolling up more fabric than you think. The finished product is going to be a very delicate, tiny hem. However, in order to get to that tiny little hem, you're actually going to end up taking up a fair amount of fabric. Let's take a look at how much seam allowance I'm actually rolling up. As I unroll this, I notice that I've actually taken up 1/4 of an inch, or about 5/8 of a centimeter. So it's a lot more than you expect. So you're really going to be pushing and kind of pushing that roll back on itself. As you begin actually stitching your roll down, you're going to start just like we did with the hem stitch video. I would recommend that you go back and watch the hem stitch video and you practice it multiple times, because it's going to be easier for you to actually do the sewing if you already have some of that muscle memory in place. So I'm going to be sewing right to left as a right-hander, or left to right as a left-hander. To start, I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to put it just on the other side of the roll, so that thread is coming out about a yarn away from the rolled edge. Just like with hemming, I'm going to take my needle and dip it down into the fabric, a little bit to the left of the tail if I'm right-handed, and a little bit to the right of the tail if I'm left-handed. So I'm going to push this needle through, and there's our first stitch. We're going to progress down the way the same manner as we do for hemming. You can see here how I'm just taking a little bit of a bite of the outer fabric and then pushing in the same motion about a yarn away from the edge. Making sure that the needle is relatively parallel to the work. My non-dominant hand is stabilizing this as I'm working, and I'm going to roll this, and then I'm going to go back and take a stitch. And you want to roll it to the same yarn on the fabric every time. So I'm going to be stitching relatively close together, about 8 to 10 stitches to the inch, or 8 to 10 stitches every 2.5 centimeters. The underside of this looks like so. So it's a little bit of a bite in the fabric, just like we do with the hem stitch. My non-dominant hand is pressing against the table, or against my lap, or against a pillow, whatever is underneath your hands, while my thumb is then holding it in place. So that's stabilizing the fabric, and then my dominant hand is gently kind of pressing along the work to the other side of the tail in order to stabilize the work as I kind of progress down the way. Now once you're ready to knot this off, I'm going to knot the same way that I've done before, by taking a tiny stitch, and instead of finishing that stitch off, I'm going to create a loop, putting that needle through the loop, pulling that nice and taut, and then taking my needle and putting it in between the layers of the roll. And then I'm going to snip this tail. That way, all of the work is hidden and it just looks like a stitch. Try this technique out the next time you want to do a fine hem, And let me know what you think of this technique. I hope that this practice is helping you remember what your hands can do. Happy sewing, everyone!